Hi, it's Alistair at Electric Scotland. This is me doing my introduction for my weekly newsletter, 29th June 2018. I might just start off by saying I just got in a kind of what we call a weather warning in Canada. It says an extreme heat event for the Canada Day long weekend. It says beginning Friday and continuing through the Canada Day long weekend, daytime highs are expected to reach the low to mid-30s with humidex values into the mid-40s. Overnight, low temperatures will only fall to the low to mid-20s, except high teens in some rural areas, providing little or no relief from the heat. Current indications suggest hot temperature could persist through next week. This will be the most significant heat event in the past few years. It says extreme heat affects everyone. And of course I noticed Scotland's going through a heat wave as well, so this might be of interest. It says the risks are greater for young children, pregnant women, older adults, people with chronic illnesses, and people working or exercising outdoors. Watch for the effects of heat illness: swelling, rash, cramps, fainting, heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and the worsening of some health conditions. Please continue to monitor alerts and forecasts issued by Environmental Canada. So, kind of sets the scene. Fortunately, I've got central air in my system, and so I'm set for 70, and it seems to be quite good for me at 70, I must confess. But of course I don't have any of the humidity, which can be a real killer. And I certainly remember very high humidity occasionally when I lived in Kuwait, and it's so humid you felt you could actually crush water out of the air. It was just, horrible. Horrible. So I don't know how people that live in humid climates can stand it, to be honest. But I suppose if you're brought up in that environment, that would be it. Anyway, so on to the newsletter. I've started off by giving you a wee article about the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland overseas. And the reason for doing this is that many of us overseas that are FSA Scots can of course attend their monthly lectures that they have. So that being the case, in their newsletter I read that you can actually watch most of their talks because they video them, and it tells you where to go so you can view them if you wish. So I put the wee article up with a link obviously to their site where you can view these lectures if you're interested. I've also done a wee plug for Princess Anne because she flew to Toronto and was back on the same day. And to be honest, if you've ever travelled from Britain to Canada, it's about an 8-hour flight. So 8-hour flight, 2 hours at the event, and then flying back. Whoa, she must be totally exhausted by the time she got back home. So good on her for making an effort to come. Okay, so on to the news. Basically, as you know, I'm covering Brexit. And the reason I'm covering Brexit is I think it's as important as the Union of the Crowns. It's a major historical event for Britain and for Scotland, and it deserves a lot of attention. I'm quite sure a lot of people are sick fed up of hearing about it and just want to get on with it. But I feel I do need to document what's going on. I don't put a lot up on the permanent part of my website. Most of what I'm putting up is in the news feeds. And I just extract some stories from the news to put into the newsletter. So you might see in the newsletter it's part of the permanent part of the site because I archive all my newsletters on the site. So as of course the Queen has just passed the withdrawal bill into law, it's obviously after all the battles before the vote in the House of Lords and everything and the Commons, it just was, there was so much information on that going on, it just wasn't true. But obviously as the Queen's now signed it into law, there's been some particular stories that have come out resulting from that, and I did feel I had to cover it, so I've given you a few more Brexit stories this week than I would normally. The first story is my vision for a global-facing, outward-looking post-Brexit Britain. This is the full text of a lecture delivered by Jacob Rees-Mogg, MP, in the Speaker's House in the Houses of Parliament on Monday 18th of June. And as it's obvious we're going to get a Brexit, I'd like us to get the best Brexit possible. And I do think we need to at least listen to some of these people that are trying to give a positive spin on Brexit. Because I think, frankly, we're just too much doom and gloom and pessimism about this. Whereas I think it's a wonderful opportunity. But of course, I've lived in many countries overseas, and I can see how we can do really well in the world. And I mean, I think I read last week, 34 countries are queuing up to do free trade deals with us. And they represent something like 67% of world GDP. So, you know, it's we need to believe in ourselves more. You know, I really do believe that. Okay, so the next story is stop being defeatist about Brexit and be inspired by Trump. Whoa, Britain's told by the US ambassador. So, Woody Johnson questioned why the UK was so nervous about this prospect of leaving the EU, a process that in his own view need not present a major challenge. So it's always good to hear what others think. Then another one is huge increase in tax revenues, increase in public spending, deficit well down. It says the BBC want to peddle myths about austerity. And the reason I put this story up is that BBC is anti-Brexit. It's very plain and clear. Anyone that listens to the BBC knows that. And in fact, in research, over 90% of all news items about Brexit are anti-Brexit. And that's just shocking. BBC are meant to be neutral. They're clearly not in this case, and they need to be held to account. I mean, if you want to hold them to account, they should have a pro-Brexit and an anti-Brexit view on everything. That might be better, at least as a 50-50 view on things. But you know, now it's been voted into law, they should be supporting it and telling us how we can do better because of it. But we're left to read other stories to get the plus benefits. The other one is just what did Jim Sellers say to the Scottish Secretary? Jim Sellers is a long-time SNP guy, so the fact that he's making some writings to David Mundell, the Scottish Secretary, is always interesting. And this is actually a copy of his actual letter he wrote to him. So we now know exactly what he said. So interesting. Then let's look forward to embracing the benefits of being a fully self-governing nation state once again. Again, this is one where this particular author is talking about the tariffs. And if you read the article, there's a link to the website where he gets all the information from, and that website tells us all the tariffs that we have to apply in the UK because of being in the EU. And I think it's a pretty eye-opener. You really need to read that article and understand what's going on. Well, you don't need to, but if you want to be a participant in this discussion, you should read it. Next one is Brexit and devolution, a primer. I think this was an important one because, well, it says that the contentions with Brexit and the devolution concerns power that are currently held by the EU, or whether they should be transferred to either the UK or Scottish parliaments when we leave the EU. So I felt it was a pretty fair assessment, and I thought maybe you'd be better reading it because there's not a lot of discussion outside of Scotland about devolution and Brexit. Then another story off the Brexit topic is the death of the mountain marathon in Scotland. It says, once a delight for ultra runners at home and abroad, the two famous mountain marathons in Scotland have recently died a quiet death. That's a shame, it really is a shame. And but I confess, I didn't really know about the mountain marathon, so maybe the problem was the lack of publicity. However, after the event, we can now learn about them, and this article will tell you all about them. Another story which I found of interest was how Highlands Poverty created the blueprint for the NHS. It says for 70 years the NHS has provided a cradle-to-grave health service throughout the UK, but many of its principles were forged in Scotland more than 3 decades earlier. And another one, the sooner we're out of the customs union, the sooner we won't have to impose its costly tariffs. This is another story about the tariffs and how, in fact, by getting rid of these tariffs, by coming out of the EU, customs union and single market, the poorest in our economy will do far better disproportionately than anyone else. This is a good story for the poor and underprivileged in our country. So the next one is equitable but not very good at keeping us alive. That's our NHS. It says Singapore delivers better health outcomes than the UK while spending far less. I put this up because there's a big debate about, NHS always needs more money. Eventually it won't, when the baby boomers all eventually will die off, of course, and there'll be a smaller population then, and so eventually what they needs will go down. But I think we need to learn, because we can't always be spending more and more money. There must be ways of saving money, and this might be a clue to how we might go about it. So well worth a read in the general debate on funding the NHS. Then another one kind of like that was where are all the people? It says Andrew Hook on a new book about Scotland's population. I found the summary in this article really great. I mean, it was very, very interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. It does actually say the book itself is a huge tome of information and quite dry to read, but certainly the summary was very interesting, and so I certainly encourage you to read this to get a bit of a view on where we're going on population terms. Then 9 new junior ministers have been appointed to the Scottish Government. Almost a major political story, this. In actual fact, I can tell you, stop press, that only 8 have now been appointed, because one was actually deselected because she posted some pretty terrible tweets some years ago. So, but obviously someone else will be appointed in her place. Then, why Nicola Sturgeon needs to stop insulting Donald Trump. 100% guarantee with this. I really definitely approve of this story, so you need to read that. But the US is an important market for Scottish goods and will only become more so after Brexit, which is obvious to anyone. So why does she keep insulting him? That's why I think you need to read that wee story. Excuse me. In case you're worried, that's just a Diet Coke with ice and a slice of lemon. So no rum in it. Okay, the next story is Meet Red John. Not a person, but a Highland hydro scheme that could be a game changer for renewables. The story of Scots in wartime London needs to be told, says the Princess Royal. Says the Princess Royal has launched a new book about the contribution of Scots in London during the First World War. Then, just as I was finishing this newsletter, I got in my daily email from CapX, and there was 2 stories which I thought I'd just add to the end. First one is, with Brexit, Britain can show the world the path to prosperity. And the other one is, what role for Brexit Britain in NATO? 2 really interesting stories there, so I recommend these to you. And that completes the news stories for this week. As you can see, most of it was tied up with Brexit situations. Okay, on to Electric Canadian. Transactions of Canadian Society of Civil Engineers. I'm continuing these. I'm getting towards the end of the collection. This is the 1944 volume. I'm kind of conscious that these PDFs are a wee bit difficult to read. You do have to up the font size to read them properly. And if you're not an engineer, you're maybe just not interested in it at all, so you just miss over it. But those in the engineering profession may well be interested, and I hope you are, because while I have by no means read everything in these volumes, I have scanned them and read the odd article. And if you do that, it's very rewarding. For example, in this particular one, there's got a story about when is an engineer not an engineer. And I really enjoyed that wee article. And there's many more in it. And there's always quite a bundle of obituaries in there. So if you knew an engineer in your family that died this, any of those dates that we've got up, you should look to the obituaries, because there may well be an obituary of your relative in there. Then Canada and its provinces, another series of volumes I'm putting up. This time I've added volume 4 to the collection, which is about the British Dominion between 1780 and 1840, and it's part 2. And another similar one is the Canadian Mining and Mechanical Review. I've got up the volume for 1890 now, which starts with an article on the gold industry of Nova Scotia. I will say I was really delighted when I found these collection of the Canadian Mining and Mechanical Reviews, because I know there's a huge mineral wealth in Canada, and I had done my best to try and find good information, and it was very, very difficult to find. And I kind of wish I'd found this early on, because I mean, Canada's got fantastic mining industry, fantastic, and this at least shows some of the history of how we went about building that. Okay, and the next one I've got is the Canadian Brothers, or The Prophecy Fulfilled, Tales of the American War by Major Richardson. He was a Knight of the Military Order of St. Ferdinand, and it's in 2 volumes. It's a novel rather than fact or non-fiction. But this is a work of fiction, but unusually it was well received by the royal family, hence I felt it was worth reading to learn more about the war between Canada and America. And there's quite a bit about it, about Tecumseh, the Indian leader, because a lot of the native First Nations fought with Canada in that war. And also, I will add, there was a wee bit at the end of his preface, which I'll read to you. It says, "We cannot conclude without apology for the imperfect Scotch, which we have, to use a homely phrase, put into the mouth of one of our characters. Our apology for which is that we were unaware of the error into the work had been so far printed as not to admit to our remedying it. We are consoled, however, by the reflection that we have given the person in question so much of the national character that he can well afford to lose something in a minor particular." So I thought that was quite good. So anyway, you might like to have a wee read of that book. The other one I've got is the St. Lawrence and the Saguenay and Other Poems by Charles Sangster. I'm quite happy to bring some poems, because I did get an email in saying you've got a fantastic collection of poetry on Lecture Scotland, probably the best I've ever seen anywhere. But he said that there's not much on the Canadian side about Canadian poetry. So hopefully this will help to redress some of that, because here's a good Canadian poet for you. Then I got another wee book I found on petroleum Canada. Now this is only about half an hour up the road from me here in Chatham in Ontario, but apparently it was I mean, obviously it was a great petrochemical community there, and there's a whole ton of Scots apparently in it. And if you read the wee book, there's a whole pile of Scots mentioned in the book. So there's a lot of pictures and so forth. Obviously an old one, because it wasn't It was to 1862 to 1908, so some years ago, so they were black and white pictures. And then finally there was two articles from Conrad Black. One is Trump has strengthened, not undermined, democracy in the US. In other words, Trump is grating, but he's a true leader and America needs him. So it's on to Electric Scotland now. I'm continuing with to put up the 19 volumes of the Commonwealth of Australia. And this time I put up volume 14, which is from March 1828 to May 1829. I've also continued with the Transactions and Journal of Proceedings of the Freeshire and Galloway Natural History and Antiquarian Society. And I've actually put a wee story up from this particular set about the clerical customs in the olden times, preaching and the pulpit. Apparently in the old days the ministers used to dress up in kind of garish colours and all kinds of things in the pulpit, and it wasn't until later that they were told to tone it down a bit, maybe wear grey or black, you know. But I thought to myself when I was reading that, it reminded me of 20 years or so ago when I put up the Domestic Annals of Scotland, the 3 volumes that I had, though they talked about celebrating Robin Hood Day. And of course I thought, well, there's a Scots celebrating an English Robin Hood, which amazed me in its own right, but apparently they dressed up in yellow taffeta and all kinds of gaudy colours, and they had a great time in the parks and areas of all over Scotland. And that just poo-pooed the idea that Scots were always sober and dull and uninteresting. Apparently we had a lot of fun back in those old days. So I thought you might like the story when I was reading all the things it said about the clerics and so forth. Then I've got a memorial of the Honourable Ian Keith Falconer, M.A. He was the late Lord Almoner's Professor of Arabic in the University of Cambridge and missionary to the Mohammedans of southern Arabia. Actually, I was delighted to find this book because I know there's a lot of Scots in the Middle East, but finding them is very difficult. And I haven't found much about Scots in the Middle East at all, so this fills another wee gap in our knowledge. So delighted to find this, and certainly I thoroughly enjoyed reading the book. Next one I've got for you is the History of Scotland. Now this is in 9 volumes plus an index by Patrick Fraser Tytler, published in 1828. Now there's a wee story behind this. I remember a year and a half ago or so, I overwrote the history index page, and I couldn't get an older copy of it back because when I tried to restore it, Steve had got a Duff backup. It's always the way, isn't it? So I had to recreate the history index page, and I completely missed the fact that I didn't put a link back to this major publication. It's one of the major histories of Scotland and very well reviewed and thought of. So I also posted up a preface, and I'll read you the first paragraph from the preface because I think it gives you the feel for it. It says, "I've commenced the history of Scotland at the accession of Alexander III because it is at this period that our national annals become particularly interesting to the general reader. During the reign of this monarch, England first began to entertain serious thoughts of the reduction of her sister country. The dark cloud of misfortune which gathered over Scotland immediately after the death of Alexander suggested to Edward I his schemes of ambition and conquest, and perhaps in the history of liberty there is no more memorable war than that which commenced under Wallace in 1297 and terminated in the final establishment of Scottish independence by Robert the Bruce in 1328. So quite a fabulous history there. So I put a link back, and hopefully now my as you know, well, I don't know if you do know, but my site is indexed weekly, and it always starts on a Thursday of every week, and usually it's finished by the Friday. So if you do a search from the weekend onwards, it'll always be most up to date. And because these books weren't indexed or linked to, obviously the search engine couldn't find them. So now the next search engine is going to find them, and that will be included in any searches that you do on the site. So really important that I discovered that problem and fixed it. The next one I've got for you in Letter to Scotland is the Hilton newsletter. I got in the summer 2018 issue. It's about the doings of an American in Caithness. And the link I've given you is to his index page, and from there you can pick up the summer 2018 issue. But if you haven't read them before, obviously all the other ones are there for you to read. He's very good at travelling around. He's working with the Highlands and Islands University in engineering capacity. And I think this is his final year, so he'll be doing, I think he goes back to America around August or something like that. But he's very good at travelling and doing walks. He takes lots of pictures, so there's a whole mixture of good information and pictures in his newsletters. And then I got an email, and a guy wanted me to promote something in the central belt of Scotland. I decided not to, but that kind of reminded me about the Kelpies and the Falkirk Wheel, which is obviously the two major things in Falkirk, which is in central Scotland. It's halfway between Glasgow and Edinburgh, and just about 20 minutes from Stirling, where Stirling Castle is, of course, you know. So it's really central, and it was obviously the big place where all the cattle the drovers used to take their cattle to, massive big cattle market. So it's very important history. And of course the Battle of Falkirk, you know, where Wallace first conquered the English. So really historical area that. I will say, my late friend Ronald McIntyre, he always said that, they put a link from the motorway, you could go directly to the Kelpies and the Falkirk Wheel. He said, I wish they hadn't done that. He said, I'd rather they took him through Falkirk to get to it. Then he said people could have visited the town and learnt more about Falkirk. So I think he had a good point there, so I just thought I'd remind people of that. He was always good, was Ranald. Certainly missed the guy. So anyway, the two videos I put up is linked to view them. Lipton Ceylon Tea Estates is another book I've put up. It's a really wee celebration of Liptons with lots of black and white photographs and everything. But it's quite a major company, of course, and it really expanded the trade in Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka. So I've actually put this book up on our Sri Lanka page. So you can, the link I've given you is directly to the book, but you can also get it if you visited the Sri Lanka page as well. And then a new section that we're going to have on the site, and I've just started creating it already, is the Shipbuilders of Aberdeen. This is a series of books by Stanley Bruce, who's the Bard of Banff. Stan is going to be sending in quite a few books in this series, and we have the first one up for you to read. And I've given you a link to the page where you can get to the first book. And he's put a good introduction in to give us an idea of what's coming. I'd like to read you the first paragraph from his introduction. It says, on this page I intend to publish my research into the shipbuilders of Aberdeen. There's much available on the internet, but unfortunately what's currently available online is scattered and doesn't readily give the full picture. Shipbuilding in Aberdeen is mentioned as early as 1475, when 3 armed ships were fitted out at Aberdeen for the service of the king, the costs being defrayed by the inhabitants of the town. In 1540 there are records regarding a further ship being built, and in 1587 6 barks were built to pursue English pirates. However, it was the latter part of the 18th century before Aberdeen became Scotland's leading shipbuilding port. It was here that the world-famous Aberdeen bow first adorned the Scottish Mind, or the Scottish Maid rather, beg your pardon, a schooner in 1839. Over 3,000 ships were built in Aberdeen from world famous yards such as Alexander Hall, Hall Russell, the Duthys, the Stevens, John Lewis, John Humphrey, Walter Hood, and many more smaller concerns. And so we're going to get histories of a lot of these shipbuilding companies. It's going to be really good, that, so I hope you enjoy that. And then I found a history of the Royal Company of Archers. I've got several mentions in the throughout the site about the Royal Company of Archers, but no really good history of them. And so having found this book, I was delighted to put this up and make it available on the site, so it's now available. And finally, the Adam Smith Lecture for 2018. I just got an email on that before finishing the newsletter, so I put this in. It's our Adam Smith Lecture showcases preeminent modern thinkers who continue to advance the ideas of Adam Smith. This year's speaker, Professor David Newmark, delivered a lecture on Monday, 11th of June, at the House of Parliament on the topic of how policymakers should think about the minimum wage. He is the world's leading economic expert on the effect of minimum wages on unemployment, having published over 50 papers on the subject. So I thought that might be of interest to some of you anyway. And finally, the story for this week is the regulation of farm servants in Dumfriesshire in 1751. I just thought it was kind of interesting to see how farm servants were paid and how they were looked after back in those old days. I mean, 1751, I mean, you know, that's a long time ago. But it just gives you a picture of people. I think as at present, something like an agitation has sprung up among the farm servants in the Midland counties of Scotland. It may not be uninteresting to obtain a peep into their condition and the relations between them and their employers in Dumfriesshire 115 years ago. And I think we can always learn from the old days, you know, as well. History is always great fun. So that's the story I've got for you for this week. And just as a wee bit of a plug to Canada, about 2 months ago I got a letter from them saying that they think that I would be eligible for what they call, let me read it here, the Guaranteed Income Supplement. And just this last week I got a letter from them. This is the letter here I've got. It says, "We are pleased to tell you that your application for a Guaranteed Income Supplement has been approved." And I mean, great, I wonder what that means, you know. And I've since learned quite a lot more about it, but apparently the 2 months ago when they sent me the letter thinking I might be eligible to get this, they had a form already pre-printed with all the figures on it and everything. I just had to sign it, return it, which I did. So obviously they've decided that I don't earn enough money and that I need some more. So apparently on the July the 3rd I'm going to receive a retroactive payment of just over $7,000, and I'm getting a new monthly pension because at the moment it's about $165 I get it per month, and this is going to go up to $665 a month. So that's quite a big increase, I have to say. So I'm more than delighted about that. And I mean, I didn't think to apply for it. It was, they wrote to me saying, "We think you should be getting this." And apparently, if I mean, I actually make enough money from my pensions to have a very good life. I'm very happy. I have no money problems whatsoever. I mean, I don't go out a lot and I don't buy that much. Just food really is the main thing, and I've always bought some good food and steaks and all kinds of stuff and a bottle of wine, and so, you know, I have no problems with the money I'm making, and to suddenly get this little windfall is obviously nice. So there you go. If you're in Canada, they look after you well. So that's it, and so I hope you also get some good news from this week or something, and see how you get on. But certainly, as always, I'll put a link to the actual newsletter under the video, and obviously I'd be keen on getting any comments from you on anything that you've heard in this newsletter. And it's always nice to have a wee to and fro in conversations. So thanks for listening once again, and hope you have a good weekend when it comes. Thanks.